All right, let's start. We'll talk a bit about upgrade issues. You have heard maybe something about that from Matt Davis. There will be another talk just in this room about 219. I will go through the things that I have seen personally, and we'll talk about Ansible Style. So let me start with a bit of the basics. You are probably using one of the options on the screen to install Ansible, and the complexity goes from top to bottom, and the flexibility kind of goes to top to bottom. And actually, I am not the one using option 3 because of reasons. One of them, we don't have AWX or Ansible execution platform, automation platform. And we are pretty much within option 2, but for some time we're in option 2.1. So you create multiple, possibly virtual environments where you have sometimes different Python versions, sometimes the same, sometimes different Ansible versions, and some maybe other package differences. And so where we are, so this slide is pretty much the same as you will see on the Ansible website. There is a generic IT site called End of Life. It also provides you just nice overview. So we are here in Ansible 13, which installs to the 20. So either you install to the 20 and collections separately, or you adopt Ansible package. And currently it's 13, but this 12 is highlighted because that is a special thing. And the control node Python version, managed nodes Python versions are often important. And in case you work with Windows, then you probably know, I have no idea, PowerShell version and whatnot. Good luck to you. And then there's end-of-life versions. For us, we got a bit stuck on 2.16 because of AMA Linux 8. And we had some CentOS 7 versions, no more. So we were able to move on to the current Ansible versions. All right, so just a few things. And most of you hopefully haven't seen those stuff, at least this /succeeded, the filter, which was called succeeded. It is gone now for 4 years, whatever. Some of you probably work with very old code bases, so there was include, and also it's no more. It was deprecated. Pre-post tasks, you might still have it in your Ansible playbooks. They still work. You just don't need them. You can convert them to something else. So one thing less to learn, which were called pre-tasks and post-tasks. And is truthy, is falsy, I think it's imperative for you to use it, to know it. So the positive sides of 2.19, Matt Davis will probably talk about that in more details. He's the one who wrote it, or co-wrote it. So the first one has nothing to do with specific 2.19. It's not adopting the newer version of Ansible, so won't adopt you to adopt certain new collections. And in 2.19, for sure, faster templating. You will not see it everywhere, but depending on the code base, certain tasks, certain things, certain Java things will work much faster than before, and better error reporting is a definite plus. So, few things that exist. And I talked to Matt several hours ago, and he was kind of open maybe to thinking about delegate to aspect, that now it needs a string, even though the task is skipped. So you need to do certain things. You might need to do that. And then I talked to him about import tasks, and I thought, and he said, maybe it's a bug. And I tried to reproduce it with a minimal example, and I couldn't. But for sure I have seen it live, so probably it's not as easy as I think. The evaluation of the variables, I will come to that. So, and the generic things is that, in general, in Ansible, there is no so much of a backward compatibility, so from time to time you will need to change the code, and there are all kinds of deprecation warnings. But in case you will jump over 4 versions, you will miss this time where deprecation warnings are shown. So you need to upgrade every version, every 2 versions, every 3 versions, but not every 4 versions, I would say. And so that was the thing about 2.19. Certain improvements are not improvements from perspective of certain people, but rather they say, well, it's a regression, something that works. So the main one in 2.19 is about this evaluation of strings or lists and whatnot. And in case you had a string, like an IP address, and you wrote the code when this doesn't make too much of a sense nowadays. So there you need to understand what is the actual variable type. You are putting bool on you're not obliged to put bool on true booleans, but sometimes you will end up using a pipe bool for strings truthy falsy, for lists length, you verify the length. And I would say that yes, you need to look into your code base and find out those things. Allow broken conditionals allows you to postpone this. The code, in case you will use it in your Ansible configuration file, then it will not break. It will show you a warning. Afterwards, you will go maybe to your Ansible logs, maybe ARA, and then you will find out those deprecation warnings. And until 2.23, if not been mistaken, this will work. So allow broken conditionals will allow you to postpone working on those variables and conditionals. And we had certain code like this, and you might not have it in your code base, and I'm happy for you. We had this. We had a certain spelling of true and false, and in the previous version it resulted in an actual boolean, not anymore. But again, pipe bool works with this code nicely, and you need just to put it. All right. And then delegate to issue. So sometimes you might end up with a thing like virtual host. So it's not an inventory, it's not what you do via @host, it's just a host name that is ended up in your vars. Maybe you combine certain things. And in case your task is skipped, previously you were like, okay, you don't need to populate this variable with a valid value. But now, no, it can't be empty. It can't be empty, that is mainly, it can't be undefined. That is maybe the issue. In some cases, you would be providing it via extra vars and whatnot. It actually forces you. I think it is about all task attributes, but maybe it's more realistic that you will run into that with a delegate to. And there is this omit, which allows you to drop this delegate to task attribute in case it's not defined. And sometimes it works. It will work nicely in your code base. Or sometimes non-empty fake string vote host, it will be never used unless you will make an error prior to that, just to have a valid string as delegate to. So that is this illustration. So this new CA renewal master is a special host with a special host name. It was never supposed to be in inventory. So, and the entire tasks were not supposed to be invoked, but because of import tasks, they got invoked, and Ansible started to evaluate not so lazily. So that is non-lazy evaluation. So a few references, like about Alma Linux 8 and Python versions, and the fact that even you have Python versions that you installed separately, it will not help you everywhere. So you will end up either with having those older Ansible versions somewhere, or you will upgrade your operating system in case you can. And pretty much that's it. For the first part, I have nothing to, and I will probably ask for questions right in the end, I would say. So the second is Ansible Style. And my work is secondary in all that. There are a lot of people who contributed with other style guides. I just went through all of them, and I understood what kind of I had done throughout those years, and I made some decisions for myself or with the team that I work with in. And so the list goes and goes. Felix is here. Thank you, Felix, for work on various aspects of Ansible. And we are not the ones who we don't work with Red Hat or something like that. So we are the ones who are just users of Ansible. And I work in a company that specializes in HR software, which is part of a larger company which specializes in ERP software. We are competitors of SAP, and in Switzerland we are larger than SAP. So what is the whole deal about Ansible Style Guide? And you might, it's not possible maybe to ignore all this because whatever you see in Ansible is effectively, it's suggesting you a certain style. Those examples, you copy paste or you use AI, and so there is style everywhere. But when I give some recommendations, I think of maintenance of the code, and even though certain things might be obvious to you, it will not be obvious probably to your new colleague. And in case you will have more code base that is more consistent, internally consistent, that will be nice. And probably, or you will go to the internet and you will find some of those examples, and you will adopt it for your style, or not, or you will just know that those are synonyms and you will leave it as. And so I kind of last one, less typing, and I will give you an example. So maybe in case there are certain alternatives, I prefer the one which involves less typing. So maybe in case you will try once again, I'm not sure if it will work now, the QR code. So I asked some people around at the conference, and here are roughly the results, and alternative 1 is mostly what people replied. So when it comes to dictionaries, dot notation in case you can. In some cases you can't do dot notation. Second is that probably variable names should be unique, more or less across the code base. But the fact that you can use double underscore for internal variables and R underscore for registers or something like that, well, there are different opinions. So quotes, in other style guides I have seen a lot of quotes where those are not strictly necessary, and I think that they are not necessary. Unless, well, of course, you deal with the thing that requires the quotes. And in case you start with the quotes and you don't have special reasons, maybe you would start with double quotes as external ones. And then you inside of them, maybe you will live with single ones. And in case it's not enough, maybe you will end up with YAML multi-line structures. When it comes to task names, you might see ensure a lot, and the opinion is split. Some people think that ensure is a nice word to describe a generic word that covers situations like configure or create or install. But I personally prefer more specific words than that: install, create, configure. And an inventory file I would say when you are a beginner, you start with ini, but YML is popular and people started to use YML more. So variables 101, you have strings, you have integers, you have floats, which are used rarely, typically in the code bases. You have lists, and you have dictionaries, and once you go a bit further in complexity, there is the idea of having a list of dictionaries. So, and here is a list of dictionaries with Venomagrit and Stromae, and I will kind of come back to this example a bit. And you might write the same thing via dictionaries inside of dictionaries, but I discourage you to do that. So I recommend you this structure. But in case you are sure about your dictionaries inside dictionaries and you will manage them, go ahead, of course. But I will elaborate on that. So a bit of this convention, you will see those var1 and whatnot, just for style guide, just for me to later on to manage those recommendations. So it's var7, you can disregard that var1 doesn't exist. So every guideline has some number. So this is the typical way, or the suggested way, or what I suggest when you deal with Booleans and when you write conditional. And so here you are explicit about Boolean, so either it will convert to Boolean, or in case it's a Boolean, it will won't do anything. And the opposite of that is not, in front of that. And not comparison with the false and whatnot. So that is one. The second one, again, maybe that is the way to write variables is not really appreciated, or you would like to avoid this, but this is the way that I ended up, we and our team ended up writing some things. And in those conditionals, I would say always put else, do not then put anything, which will result in a none type, kind of a null value. And of course, you need to understand what will happen with your tasks in case you will reach that else. So you need to think about that. But here, most of the things like this, Jinja with those directive math, I'm not sure. Materis was the one who says what does the percentage sign and whatnot. So those will return typically a string. I will not cover other situations. And so yes, you end up with doing conditional something like is truthy. So Jinja is everywhere. And one, you might not use Jinja to copy the file, but actually I would suggest for you to think that the template module is a default one. So today your script might not be templated, might not have any Ansible within a script. And in cases like that, you will have it as a file. But for other things, maybe it's better for you to put your file, once again, it's a bash script or a Python script in your templates directory to use a templates module, to have J2 extension, and maybe later on you will inject some Ansible variable into that. Why not? And then Jinja does a bunch of things. So, in case there are conditionals within tasks and there are conditionals within variable definition. Of course, you can put this inside the task, but I would discourage that. So maybe you use something that is on the top. So either you return some strings or you return some booleans. But the lower part is what I have ended up, which is not editized, maybe in the Ansible community. Maybe it's discouraged. I have no idea. But when the quantity of conditions increases because of reasons, because of your application, maybe, just maybe, you can do if, elif, and all kinds of things within those things. And either you put those curly brackets and you put variable name, or in this case, staging is just a string. And this is totally fake example, so you shouldn't be too strict towards this. So integers, the main thing in Ansible is that they can implement comparison, arithmetic operations. In case you don't need those, probably you need to put quotes around something that looks like an integer and to treat it as a string. So typically it works like this, but sometimes you end up using integer filter to cast it to integer and then do some comparison operation. So default, so within the style guide, I recommend to use D instead of default because it's less typing. And then, even though sometimes you can just ignore the type and say defaults, 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 probably you shouldn't. So you should insert the empty value, so to say. It's either false or an empty list or an empty dictionary. And that's it. So you have your handling of defaults, and you will need that, I would say, a lot, but it depends. All right. So going back to this, how when the complexity grows of the variables, what do you do? And my suggestion is you go towards list of dictionaries. You start adding the attributes. You start adding the attributes basically. And because of things like select attribute, I'm not sure that you will end up using reject attribute a lot, and map. You can do all sorts of things, I would say, with that. So you forget maybe about dict to items as a byproduct of this approach, which might be nice. I have no idea. At least I avoided that dict to items and items to dict and whatnot. And select attribute and map. And there is a way to handle the optional attributes, like select attribute and then defined. I'm not showing it here. But I think that with a couple of tools you will be able to do a lot of things. And then going further a bit to this complexity. So what do you do when you need to go one level deeper? And in case going back to this example with René Magritte, there could be a list, or again a list of dictionaries inside the first one, and you might sometimes need to iterate it in a certain way. So there are tools, sub-elements will allow you, in case you have everything within one variable, in case you have two variables and you are iterating using the second one, then it's with nested. But I think that there could be another syntactic option, but I don't remember that. So the variables, I think many of you are supposed to run into a variable not defined. I'm not sure what kind of tooling will allow you to prevent this. I think that you will end up with that. And I think that it's better to maximize putting initial value, probably in defaults main while. So you will avoid some variable undefined errors. Otherwise, you will need to put a lot of that in tasks. But when it comes to register, and then there is a shell module, and then there is standard out, and that one, it is weird, it would be weird for you to initialize .standardout in defaults main YML. I would say it would be weird. So on the register things, you would inline, I would say, pipe D. So where to put variables, and James Freeman here delivered a talk, and of course he showed 8 places where you define variables and the precedence rules around that. I think you can cut some of those places, or I would recommend to cut them, not use them at all, because it's way too confusing. So a lot of them will end up with defaults or vars, and then I would suggest you, when you are overriding, then put it in defaults. When you are not overriding, put it in vars, and I give some further examples later on. And then group vars, inventory variables, I would say it's better to minimize them in case the variable is truly dependent on the host. Okay, but otherwise I think that you might be able to do better things via group vars than with inventory. And set fact, I will come to that. And other places, do you need them? In case you know that you need them, go ahead. But otherwise, all right. So in case it's a variable used by a single role, probably defaults main YML, vars main YML. In case of 2 roles, I would say use include vars in the very beginning with tags always. So you do include vars and then label dir, roles, whatever. You have the peer role and they share the variables, and you do, I would say you do include vars. Or you end up with group vars. And which group you will end up, I don't know, it depends on you. I'm saying that maybe you will end up with all. It's not a big tragedy. You cannot have, of course, group vars all is a place where you need an extra maintenance, I would say. So you need to be careful. Then you don't encapsulate, you kind of throw it to the world a bit with group vars all. Yeah, so a few guidelines when you are not sure, vars or defaults. In case you override it, probably group var, then it's defaults. In case it's like constant or something logic manipulation, probably vars. And then there could be additional files, and there are rules on which file is sourced automatically. But I isolated a bit of the things which are messages and whatnot to a separate file. Like it says, hello, I am that, and whatnot. The email, why you would mix it with logic. So I ended up isolating that. So set fact, I think, is sometimes a bit abused, I would say. It's used a bit too much. So when you generate a password and you use it afterwards, you cannot run the lookup plugin again because it will be new value. So set fact will make it constant within execution. So that's nice. And then sometimes you end up with set fact delegate fact because you move the variable from left to right. Maybe. Once in a blue moon, we overwrite the Ansible magic variable using set fact. Super rare. And there is a pitfall that I would recommend using import tasks. But of course, the import is done at the invocation, so it doesn't know that you changed the variable. So you need to understand how set fact and import tasks play with each other. So set fact, a lot of those things can be avoided. You might run something and there is a register. You're not supposed to put that immediately after this command to put set fact that processes this register. No, it can be there in var's main YML. Don't worry about the ordering. It will be all just nice. So does a variable have a sensible default? And you put it in your initialize. But then for register, you will use a filter. So extra vars versus tags. Minus E option. So you need just to remember that when you specify it without any JSON, it will be a string. And because of that, in case you do minus E, something equal to true, this true is a string. So in your code, it's supposed to have pipe bool. And probably it's better to avoid extra vars up to the extent possible. For installation, you probably don't need them. But for certain things ad hoc, I would say people are using it for troubleshooting. Troubleshoot that, troubleshoot that. And you kind of steer the behavior via extra vars and not via tags, I would say. That's the recommendation. So tags, first of all, they help a lot in troubleshooting. Occasionally, you use them all the time in order to minimize the execution of the role, in order to do something, certain specific things. And of course, in case you are using tags in such a way that it causes a drift over time, because the system never got this role executed, then of course you need to do something about it. So, but tags, I think that tags should never steer a behavior. So you shouldn't do all the possible things with analyzing which tags it was run to in order to get to the final state of the system. Final state of the system is determined by the group vars and other vars, and not by tags that you ran with. So tags, I described that. For debug, there was a talk of a person from a company called Steampunk, and he described the new tool he has written about the debuggers. I think it's super cool. He mentioned some of the things I'm mentioning here. You do probably debug, or typically I would do pause prompt instead of fail. So just it will pause it in that moment of time, and that prompt will have the variables that I'm troubleshooting. And toNice YML is a nice filter, I would say, for a bunch of things. So in case you would like to display something, it might be not you, it might be the person who runs it with additional verbosity. Yes, so this debug is not useful in troubleshooting. I would say to keep it in your main branch as well, in your code base, but with a certain verbosity, 1, 2, 3, depends on you. So meta main YML, and you might have it a lot in your repos because it's part of Ansible Galaxy role init and whatnot. The truth about that I found that this file is probably badly maintained. So there is a minimal Ansible version. There are distributions. Nobody updates them. Maybe nobody reads it. In case it's not the case for your code base, then for sure keep it. But I would say maybe you should delete it altogether. You will not be able, I think, to publish to Galaxy, but in case it's your private role, never in community, that's right. And then actually, Kirill was giving the talk, and he explained a bit about argument specs that also belong to meta. Yeah, of course, in case you adopt it for your roles, that's the file you will have in your meta. So blocks. Blocks is, I think, is a pure style decision. So you might be the person who likes blocks a lot, or you might be the person who dislike them for any reason. So you're forced to use blocks when you use rescue. Rescue is sometimes a very good idea very good idea. But I don't think that you will put rescues all over your code base. That's, I think, won't happen. I personally dislike a bit blocks for other cases than rescue. I typically split the files further. I do import tasks a lot with the separate files and not the blocks. I'm tired looking at this indentation for one reason. But yeah, your mileage might vary. So import tasks and include tasks. In case you don't know one over the another, I would say use import tasks. In case you have the reason to use include tasks, of course, then you know them. But this fact that import tasks does the thing that you might use via block, that is a common set of task attributes, I think is super cool. Do not repeat yourself is done via, I would say, import tasks, and you add all kinds of things which are common for this file with tasks. Assert versus fail. People having background in other programming languages, you might know the semantics of a difference between assert and fail. I would say you might ignore that unless you come to a different agreement within your team. I would say that you might ignore this semantical difference between assert and fail, but you might look at the final result. And for me, the final result of assert is slightly better. And it's slightly. And that is when you have multiple conditions. When you have multiple conditions, you need to have multiple fails in order for that to make sense. While in assert, you do assert that, you do 5 lines of your conditions, and Ansible shows you which one has failed. So less code, I would say. So for multiple checks, assert, I would recommend that. And yeah. So, and assert and fail, I think is very cool when you don't trust the input, when you don't trust the output. It's either towards other users of your roles or to other people who are not that familiar with the output of the system. And you verify whether it makes sense. It makes troubleshooting so much better. In case you run into the failure of assert and not the failure of the module itself. And also you understand that the person has written assert with certain things in their mind. So I think it's really good. So assert, there is a fail message, but in case I would say that in case it's the name of the assert, you have the JavaScript name, it describes it, maybe it's enough. So you don't need fail underscore message. And in the case of multiple conditions, in your fail message, you need to describe all of them together, which makes it a bit confusing. So you need to always to get used to the fact that assert will return you the exact condition that failed, and you need to troubleshoot that. So, filters 101. So there are pipe notation on the Ansible filters. There are Ansible tests, and they are using Ginger built methods also dot web. So lookup plugins, they are always executed on the control node. Why you would use it? There are many of them. I give you kind of 4 or 5. Generate random password, check file contents on the Ansible control node, find files that match the pattern, execute some Linux command, OS command, I would say, date or dig. So for example, even though you will have Ansible fact that contains date and time, I recommend to use lookup pipe and execute the Linux command date, but it depends on you. But of course, this will change with every invocation of that lookup plugin. So you need to understand what is going on and what all kinds of formats that you might have over there. Of course, this is the most extensive one with ISO, with all bells and whistles, but for some reason you, of course, don't use all this precision and whatnot. So, filters and tests in Jinja. So there is equal to, there is not equal to, there is comparison. That is straightforward. There is it's Ansible test in. Is it a substring is part of the string? Then there is a search. Again, there are two more ways to do that. But I'm saying, okay, here's the search. So you would do search. And then there is regex search and regex final. So checking if the file exists, you need to differentiate whether you are working on the control node or on the manage node, on the remote node. In the left part, you have the things. So first of all, there is this is exists. I think that is the easiest. You provide a path, and it returns a boolean. Sometimes, I would say, rarely, you need to read the file on your Ansible control node, lookup file. But a lot of the times, of course, you work on the remote node. There are no lookup plugins over there, so you might end up using stat or slurp. Slurp for reading the file, or stat whether the file exists. So this, not with this task, of course, with this presentation. So this is the GitHub, and there this PDF. And if there are any questions, long list of credits, so to say. All the amazing work done by someone else and not me. Any questions? Yep.
Can you put the link also on the page for your talk?
Yep, of course. Yeah. Yes, of course. Yeah.
You can just edit, like go to the CFP, edit it.
Yeah. CFP. Yeah. All right. Then. And so the last, the next step, of course, you can. I haven't left the email and whatnot, but of course you can come to me personally now, and we'll change the context. In case for any reason you are the author of the style guide, alternative one, maybe we can merge certain things. I have no idea. I just tried. I think that there are 5 of them. Maybe in 2 years there will be 10 of them. That's life. It's hard to merge everything into one place to agree with everyone on all those things, but otherwise, thank you very much.